Welcome to Into the Dataverse, a podcast where we talk to builders, founders, investors, and everyone in between about all things open data. Today, we're going to be talking about AI, X, crypto, and we want to go beyond the buzz and see what it's really all about. We're super lucky to have three awesome guests here today, so I'm going to hand the floor over to them to let them introduce themselves and explain why they're in the crypto X AI space, what they're enthusiastic about, and what they're working on.
Thanks for having us and doing this. Pretty excited. I am Sheref, co-founder of Index Network. At Index, we are building a protocol for discovery, and crypto and AI both relevant to information discovery. One of them is removing intermediaries. The other one is connecting data with natural language. So it's natural for us to do this. But yeah, super curious for this chat today.
I think what you guys have been working on is really cool. I played with it and you showed me a demo and I really liked it.
I'm Andrew, CEO at textile.io. We build protocols to help move, store, secure, and share data. So we build Tableland, which is an indexer and database for EVM-based blockchains. And we build Basin, which is the easiest way to think about it right now is object store on a decentralized network. So you can use it like a S3 or like a data availability layer for many use cases.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with Tableland.
Thanks for having me. David Minaj. I'm co-founder and CEO of Valerie. Valerie is the co-contributor to OLAS, the Autonomous. Ultimately, we care about creating AI systems that people can co-own. And today, we're building decentralized autonomous agents. The OLAS protocol basically has the two parts, like one is the stack and one of the protocol coordinates agent use cases in crypto and outside. And the stack enables you to build these kind of autonomous agents that can either be run by an individual or, and as such, these agents also use these fantastic products of mine to read this experiment.
Everybody's all about the AI agents now. So yeah, I guess let's start from like a really big question, which is what kind of basic. What do you think are the biggest limitations of AI as we know it, centralized AI, and how do you think crypto can solve those?
I think the problem of centralization, besides from privacy risks and the control risks, there are also use case limitations. One company cannot serve our own needs, and if you put all our data into just one company's data store, we will be limited to what they provide to us. So our data should belong to us, and it should be exposed to open ecosystem so that other developers, other companies can provide use cases for all of us. So it's eventually will be open, and it's a natural path for AI, and happy that we are building it.
Anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll hop on to that. Yeah, I think that's an important part is the data. More generally, or in addition, we have like two key things, right? For AI is like the data and the algorithm. Second part also is centralized, and there's a couple of like risks, I guess, associated from a user point of view, which is why it can be interesting to think about decentralizing this. So one very obvious one is around sort of platform risks. So if I'm like using like a certain product, and this becomes like more and more integral to my business or me as an end user, if it's very centralized, I might like lose access at any point in time. But it can be as trivial as like, I asked it to generate the wrong kind of content, all the way to it will just sort of outright reject me from the platform forever and my business will break down. So obviously there is like an immediate like need for some to build on like architectures that are like generally more permissionless and generally more open. Then I think another key thing is if you think about sort of integration and composability is that centralized systems can move often faster, right? So you can have like a nice API and people like the other developers can connect with it. But that API is, often like very restricted and basically serves whatever that company wants in addition to this platform risk, which I just mentioned. And so one exciting thing about building in a more open domain and, smart contracts are a great example is like they create a form of composability which goes beyond what the initial designer might have intended. So you get this all like unexpected like compositions on top in which these kind of products are used. And then like if you think about AI specific use cases more generally, like it's pretty clear that like AI can benefit from blockchains if you look at it this way around. So you have like basically if you have agentic AI, how is it going to transact? Well, is it going to use the Stripe API? Well, maybe for some use cases, but it is definitely faster and more flexible to use like a blockchain wallet and transfer assets and hold assets on something like Ethereum on permission like credibly neutral substrate, right? So I think there are a couple of examples which go beyond the sort of algorithm and data part. And then I think like on the very technical level, there's these, benefits of being able to own, control, etc., like the algorithms and data which make up your AI product.
Yeah, I think the question is interesting. The biggest limitations of AI and how does crypto solve it? I kind of think about it. I kind of think about the limiting areas of AI broadly versus the sort of like social limitations of how we're building AI right now. I think a lot of people are focused on that, but really thinking about like, how do we get to the next generation of AI models? And they're really limited by just a few things. One is sort of human resources, like all the large AI companies are trying, they can't hire fast enough. They're really smart people. There aren't enough of those smart people in the world. And that's a really hard one for crypto to address, but maybe over the long run we can. Another one is the hardware itself. I think it's super interesting right now, like the GPU limitation and how we build the hardware infrastructure is real. Like there's a real trade-off here about training the next trillion parameter model versus actually using those GPUs for inference and selling your API access or like building a better social network or whatever it is that these large companies are doing. So they actually have a constraint there. And I think there's an interesting avenue for crypto projects to sell into those companies for one half of that, which is actually the inference half. And then the last one is data. And that's the area that I'm mostly focused on. And all of these projects are limited by data right now. And there's no question in my mind that the biggest leap forward there is going to be synthetic data, whether that's through data set generation or self-play with synthetic data built into it. But what I think is a really interesting thing is that all of the models today that we're playing with are sort of hybrid in what data they've been built on. So like large language models are largely dependent on high quality text data. And we know that data is projected to sort of be embedded in all the major models within the next couple of years. Like all that data will be consumed. Where did that data come from? Predominantly decentralized network, not crypto networks, but the internet itself as a protocol and scientific publications, for example, distributed across many different owners. And I think that's a super interesting thing to think about and realize that there's a major opportunity here to say, well, all of those data, all of those models are going to be data constrained very quickly here. And they're all going to be looking for how do they source the next wave, the next 10x of high quality data, whether that's synthetic data or monetized data. And I think there's a huge opportunity for crypto to address that. So that's where we're really excited.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that as like a way of sort of preventing the exploitation of the people that are obviously going to be contributing to future LLMs. Thanks to everyone. Those are really interesting answers. I guess we'll move to the next question now. What industries do you see benefiting the most from a crypto XAI?
It's a great question. I want to tag on to what Andrew was just saying and kind of connect it a bit. So presumably in the top level of the answer, presumably we'll see benefits both like which are focused on crypto only use cases, as well as what would others consider more like trad AI use cases where the sort of crypto rails just facilitate some new way maybe of like incentivizing synthetic data or, creating incentives around model training or inference and so on and so forth. So what we do at OLS and Valerie is basically we focus on autonomous agents. And we think that they're like a key part of that story because if you think about more generally, like what agents do and compare that with like the evolution of the web, then like an interesting new class of use cases emerges. So historically, right, we have like apps, like this is what everyone currently focuses on, like building apps, and apps are like tied to this interactive paradigm where basically I am there, I'm like using the product right there and then, like be it like something as like a social media application or even like ChatGPT, right? Like I'm using ChatGPT either as a client or as a human end user, like software client or human end user right there and then. I interact with it, I prompt it, it gives me some response. But really where it's headed and what's super interesting is these sort of agentic use cases. And in the agentic use case, rather than you as the end beneficiary of some, product, being there all the time whilst doing it, you're sort of consuming the final output. So if we think about like, real world examples, like sort of physical world examples, like taking a car, like historically you'd interact sort of the Uber app and then the Uber driver to get you from A to B. Now you can sort of interact one with the Waymo app and then it takes you from A to B, right? And then that's sort of an example. You have a microwave heating your food, but then in the software domain, there's so many like endless amounts of applications to be built around these outcomes paradigm. So rather than me saying, oh, like in a crypto context, oh, I want to like trade asset A for Y, which assumes basically I know what asset A is and why I want to trade it this way, and also assumes all sorts of knowledge about crypto. I can come with a much, much higher level intent, which is like something like, oh, I want to basically just have like ownership over a system which manages my wealth, right? And it might, as a result, like trade asset A, Y, whatever, and it might do a whole bunch of other things, but I no longer need to know all these things. Similarly, you can have an agent who basically writes code for you, right? That's a reality today outside of crypto, and you can leverage it in crypto as well. I mean, think about smart contracts, but also about autonomous agents like we do. So I think that's how I like look at it from a very high level. It's like really this shift towards the kind of products we can build, and crypto is like uniquely like able to facilitate that by reference to a couple of points I made earlier. Like a lot of these products are going to be very powerful. Like all these people's concerns around AGI also stem from the fact that they don't necessarily control their own. If everyone controls their own AGI and they're sort of on the same level playing field, it's a very different game from if there's like one centralized, right, which someone controls. So we will want to own these very powerful agents, right, as end users, and we want to basically align them with us and not worry about aligning them with society, whatever that may mean. And so I think that's, the very high level. And then if you go kind of down as to how this gets delivered, then you get like use cases around like specifically how can we create data flywheel, come back to Andrew's point, like, you need high quality data ultimately for better models. Like where does this come from? Actually, should all that be fully public, right? Like you have these whole questions around if it's fully public, well, then your centralized provider also gets that to train their model. Do you want that? Or can you like leverage like cryptography, that part of crypto to basically like maybe restrict access to like a set of people who maybe not know each other, but like kind of are economically aligned? Then how do you think about like inference? Do you care about like knowing that this model does exactly what the tin says, or, do you kind of trust that the provider does it? Are you basically having like some centralized provider? So there's products there. Around training, I'm personally less optimistic, but there's now various people building these. So I think you go all the way from like the infrastructure level of inference, like data, model training, all the way up to like middleware it sits on top, and then like the applications. And I think in the applications, we'll see a lot of it.
I want to add something to this response. I agree 100%. And now we are making an abstraction called agents. So this abstraction is pretty broad. The interesting part is agents can also collaborate with other agents. So like in the previous day, we were connecting our data, building our systems, and in quotes, architecting these systems. It's like statically building these circuits. Now, if you just build an agent and just deploy into an ecosystem like all us, Now your agent is a social algorithm. They can interact with other agents on behalf of you. They can sell something, they can buy, they can do anything. And the interesting part is the socialization part is natural language. So that makes agents are super flexible. Like by deploying or by just running an agent, you exposing your use case into a number of different use cases. I think the possibilities are open-ended, and we also don't know what the final outcome will be like. Just there will be infinite chaos in the agent ecosystem. Maybe trillions of agents will be collaborating in the background for our intents, for our wishes, and we'll be ensured we'll get the final outcome is the best as a universe we can do. So this is the most exciting part, and from my perspective, and it affects all different industries. All the industries will be affected from this new architecture. Agents are the new collaboration structure for software, for use cases, for businesses. So that was my answer to David. But the second part is the nature of LLMs are interesting because language is a user-centric thing. It's by interacting with large language models like language, we basically composing our intent. That's also different because, and also like language is an information discovery mechanism. If you think of that, we are retrieving information with natural language, but this time user can compose what they want. In the previous day, today, for example, we had these marketplaces, we had these dating apps and professional networks. Then they provide us some filters and structural forms for information discovery. Now the user is completely in control and they can navigate across these information discovery roads. So that means the future protocols will use natural language and their main information transmitting mechanism, and we will be able to preserve user intent down the road. So all the different levels of protocols will preserve that user intent, and that will allow us to create user-centric internet. So what is the best data environment for user-centric internet? If you like LLMs are providing us user-centric discovery, but we need a data environment for user-centric data. So Web3 is the natural solution to that, right? Like we are building these systems, composable data, user-owned data, privacy, and all of it for years, and it fits perfectly. We'll have best quality data for ourselves. Our data will have more integrity, and it will fit perfectly to have better experiences on the web.
I don't have much to add to that, but I kind of have a question for the other two related to that. When I think about the application of agents, a lot of conversations go that direction in the like applying your personal intent to within like really complicated systems, essentially. But then I think about the short term, like where am I most likely to start leveraging agents? And it actually feels much more tractable, the like use cases for agents within an organization. So I can like quickly imagine, the majority of say like Series C through Series B startups have large treasuries that are likely invested or utilized to their maximum value until they're hiring people. So there's like some clear CFO agents that could be deployed in a business. There are HR agent, there are legal agent that could be more or less monitoring all of your board meetings and everything like that. I see a lot of opportunity there, but a lot of conversations go to consumer. And so I don't really follow the agent sort of innovation and like strategy. So I'm just curious the other two, like whether they see that or if it really is going to be consumer first agent work.
I think, yeah, great question. Probably if you were to do ranking by like actual revenue, I guess on the B2B side, you'll see more right now in terms of agents actually being deployed in production. Also, agents there's element where agents both like under-delivered and over-delivered. Like last year, everyone was talking about agents, and then, people basically implied like there was some form of AGI there, which obviously in the case, like agents are highly use case specific at the moment, and they work well in some environments and very poorly in others. And it tends to be that like often they're like kind of evolving from like a process automation level to something more open-ended, right? So yeah, I would agree that the end user side is a more open question still. I think like the way we practically see it in OLAS, so we have some data to draw upon, like OLAS has different use cases. Some of them are totally end user focused, like Governator and like Contribute, which are two kind of social applications where the agent can offload some of the work from humans in a governance context and a marketing context. They have, adoption, but relatively speaking to our biggest use case, which is OLAS Predict, which has like orders of magnitude more adoption, which is more like a multi-agent system, like Saraf was pointing at, where the agents are basically working on behalf of the users, but not in a domain where the user would actually do that thing themselves, but rather where the user runs them because they have financial benefit from running, like they're operating basically an employee of some multi-agent system use case. So in OLAS Predict, these agents basically make predictions, have done hundreds of thousands of transactions on the Orbis chain, and it's really like generating also a whole bunch of synthetic data as an end result, which is a nice side effect, allowing us to sort of improve models and so on. So yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I think like also practically like due to the specialization, like the kind of use cases you can cater for like with end users is still more challenging. One product which we're currently building is called Baby Agent. So as the name implies, it's a trader agent that kind of does sort of what I said in the beginning, like kind of implements a portfolio strategy the user does not know and doesn't even need to understand exactly how it's implemented cross-chain and so on. So you can think of it like your personal wealth manager in a sense. We'll yet have to see how like well that does, but like the concept there is to really kind of abstract this concept of crypto down to the idea that yes, there's crypto assets, but you don't need to know like how they're moving around and where they're moving around. And you can focus on like some very high level, like, risk benefit trade-offs.
Yeah, that's interesting because like then when I think about turning over my personal finances to the agent, there's like high risk there, but there are other opportunities for agents to make me money. Like we talk a lot about in decentralization selling like unused resources. So it's like the whole idea of the inference networks. It's like, selling unused CPU, GPUs. It feels like for an infrastructure provider, say you're running a node on Render or Filecoin or something like that. Instead, having a Dockerized agent that was just able to deploy new infrastructure on your or new software on your infrastructure to maximize your earns over really short periods of time. Feel like I would run that on my Mac. Why not? Those sorts of agents seem really immediately like useful. Yeah, I'm curious if like the developer world is like moving that way, like the Devons of the world having like moving past the agent and having like an actual like developer on your team that is actually a composite set of agents. Feels like there's just like having my like infrastructure operator being an agent is where we'll go.
Yeah. I think it's a compelling, and like what's interesting with use cases like Devon, like basically writing code and like a software engineer, and use cases like Let's Predict, or this Baby Legion is that they all generate a ton of new data in a way which maybe some of these process automation like things don't so much, and maybe not as interesting as data. And this is like sort of conceptually where I see like crypto AI potentially having a route past like centralized AI, which is that I do believe, yes, we'll have like foundational models that will be very powerful and centralized, but I also think like the very long tail, and there'll be a massive long tail, will be specialized models. We can already see this, and there'll be like more smaller parameter count, fine-tuned to specific data. And so the question is, how can like these use cases, these industries collaborate to establish like data sources which can feed into ongoing like retraining and maybe one day like kind of more active architecture without that data then leaking back into some centralized pool? Because like as you said in your piece, Andrew, like we can't just like build crypto in and say, okay, well all that data will be super public, because then like by definition, you're always behind like the centralized one, right? Because they'll have your data plus some more. So the question would be like, how do you create like these data flywheels where the data will basically be like in some form encrypted and then like kind of shared at the right point to update certain like models, and then like how do you get these models like, you know, used and paid for proportionally? I think these are like conceptually the questions people are now really kind of focusing on in the industry. And like if any industry I think has the right tools to answer these questions, it's the intersection of AI and crypto, but like we're not quite there yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I want to add something small. So I think where agents are going, and in the short term, how it's going to be like. Today, there are two types of agents. The first one is for legacy systems, like we are using agents for our existing systems. So these are mostly like, CFO agents and like personified agents. So we think agents like maybe super agent, maybe superhuman. We think like agents as human, that has human-like capabilities. I think these are mostly useful for existing legacy systems to automation purposes. And on the other hand, there are now agents native architectures on the other side. And in this environment, agents are more likely super micro things. And they do one thing super clearly, they have reputation, they're doing that one thing super perfectly. And like, I think conversion of these super micro agents will be like kind of neurons. They will act one thing super clearly and that's it. And there will be trillions of them. But I'm also super curious how it's going to be like. Every day I'm seeing something new and surprises me. They're building and surprising together.
Really interesting stuff. Right now, there's like such a huge amount of generative art and a lot of controversy around that. Where do you see crypto verifiable data or provenance playing in?
So I think, so there's like certain problems which can be solved and certain that can't, like by design, right? Like around data, I think there's a lot of, you know, there and other data experts, but like ultimately, like, you know, once someone copied your data, right, like they have access to it, and like there's no way for you to like kind of get that back. That value has leaked, and that's like one of the key, like, I guess, limitations around the system which you can build there. And what I see sometimes is like kind of these, I guess, shoehorning exercise where like I don't think like crypto can necessarily solve all the problems there. So if you think, for instance, think about verifiability, like be it of data or compute, like there's certain specific use cases my two colleagues can dive more in, like where we can provide tools and like infrastructure to make that better. But then you also have to ask, like, does it matter? So for instance, like if your agent is ultimately like just like you, like a single entity, and it acts on its own behalf or on your behalf, and let's say you have it on your device and it uses like a local model, like verifiability isn't like something you care about, because like what you basically need to know is that you downloaded the correct software, like, you know, in any application, and then that's it. Off you go. However, obviously I outsource like compute, for instance, of like call to a large language model. Well, it would be quite helpful to know that the provider has actually run the correct model and actually like inputted my prompt into it and so on. But then like the question is not just like, would it be helpful, but also would it be cost efficient? And like right now, the answer is no, like it's not even feasible, right? Like, large language models, like the big one, there's no way you can actually do this. And then there's like some statistical methods where you can be quite sure that like things are, you know, probably generated by this model. And then I think it really comes down to the use case to be specific and say, well, does this use case need it? And I think interestingly, this means that we'll always have like this role of reputation there, like that won't go away. So thinking about like reputation in the human sense, I mean, like a large part of like builders and crypto have done that for a long time and focus on that. That will also be very important in the agent context. Humans are also agents, like just different economic actors. Like, can you like build up reputation metrics which can replace sort of knowing these things. And then like you have Oracle problems as well, right? Like with data, like, okay, well, like, where, like, ultimately, where does it come from? How does it get generated? Like sometimes that can only be like probabilistically answered because you might be unable to like, ultimately verify it on a sort of cryptographic level all the way to the source. So I think this is a very tricky space. And when it comes to like, I guess like, projects which are interesting there, I guess like you have like WorldCoin, right? There and another like proof of personal sort of protocols which try to sort of identify who is like a human. I think that will be very relevant going forward. And then it'll be equally interesting to know like, is something an agent and like with what likelihood and so on. Lots of open questions, but I'm not sure we have a lot of answers in.
I mean, yeah, like to that original question, it's super tricky. Data is a really weird thing. Like back before the current LLM, period of technology, I always said like data doesn't have a delete button. That was kind of your first point, is like once the data's out there, there's no putting it back. And anybody who tells you they delete it is either an honest actor or making it up. And it's very hard to tell from the outside what they are. And this is why like data leaks always happen after the fact. And there's tons of data in there that sort of like shouldn't have been. Delete doesn't exist on data. So, but then the other point is like provenance is opt-in a way. Like nobody has to tell you where data came from. And so we kind of can imagine a perfect world where all data has clear provenance, but the cat is sort of already out of the bag on there. And we're like trying to scrap together all sorts of data that didn't exist in that world. And so there's no clear picture over the coming decades where data is at clear provenance across the board. And so we have to live in this world where there's going to be like uncertain data and it's going to be very hard to put back together. And even when people opt into provenance, it's sort of often is disconnected from the actual source of data. So like unless you're building highly secure, like with like root chain of trust, even issues, hardware that is collecting data and signing that data, it's like very hard to imagine a world where like we know for certain that data didn't come from an LLM or it came from an LLM. I think what we can do a lot of times is like get the chain of provenance so clearly articulated that it has a very high level of trust. But even then, it's super tricky. And so I just don't know. Yeah, I think to what David was saying, it's just like there are some things that will be solved and there are many things that won't be solved. Like it's just going to be a weird future. It's going to be a weird next 5 years as far as data goes in my mind.
I think the words are also changing. Like what is real or what is not. Do we want our data to be provenant or real sources? I think we'll give up from this world where everything will be generated a little bit. Everything will be probabilistic. We don't care if we opt out from these systems. We will compromise a lot from our comfort and use cases. The only remaining problem is like two problems. Well, first, like the crediting the creators. I think they'll find the better ways to make money from their creations. There will be multiple ways if you create something. So that's another opportunity for creative expression. So if you cannot prove you created, maybe you should. There will be multiple ways on the attribution side. But on the other side, there's a super important topic. Yes, trust. Trust is different. If you don't know that the data is real, it's a source, what we are going to do. So trust is an attribute of human. It's not an attribute of data. If we can like certifying data or doing these systems, of course, these are valuable for some use cases, but we'll have protocols for trust. We'll have different structures to construct trust. And we won't know where we are like in. Like, if that data is true, 100% true, the question will remain, can we trust this? Like it might be 30% real and 70% generative, but the question, like, can we trust this? If we can construct this reflex with decentralized protocols, I think we will feel safe, still be safe, and navigate across the huge number of information. Yes, I think it was 10 years ago I started working with like the core idea of index with journalism. And Santa Clara University, there was a research in Santa Clara University. It's called Trust Project. And there was a Trello board of this project, and there was at least 40 different metrics for trust, like they found. It may be more of it. So trust is complicated, and it's not an attribute of data, but we need trust. So there will be trustful systems thanks to this protocol. I have no concerns about it.
I was just thinking that's like, it's such an amazing soundbite. Everything will be generated a little bit. I was thinking about that and playing it out in my head. Like, there's no photo on a mobile phone anymore that isn't generated a little bit, you know? So we live in this world where what people share as reality is no longer direct representation of reality. And then I was thinking about my own like styles of writing. When was the last time I wrote beginning to end all the way through editing any piece of work that didn't get generated a little bit and it quickly went away? So yeah, we just live in this world that everything's generated a little bit.
I mean, even this call, right? Our work is not truly represented on the other side.
And then I use AI to edit it after. So
Exactly.
it's a little
All
bit
the
more
bad bits
degraded. But does that scare you? I mean, this is not really related to the main thing, but does that scare you a little bit? Like, I feel like we are sort of going in the direction of just everything just keeps getting more and more generative. And like there's a lot of people, I think, who still can't differentiate between real and generated. Like, we're younger, and I think also you guys are obviously very like expert in this, but I don't know, it just scares me a little bit to think about how everything keeps getting more and more generative. Maybe like Valley, where do you guys see crypto and AI in 5 years?
My position is obvious. I embrace it. I am curious about it. I think, like, of course, there's a scary part of it. We have to compromise, but we will be able to navigate in information out of boundaries of cultures, and different perspectives will be discoverable, and it will solve a lot of conflicts. It will, we will be discoverable. We will be more visible. The value will be more discoverable. So the opportunities are huge. Yeah. So I'm okay to compromise from reality. I have no concerns personally, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's reason to be scared, and then one also should like reflect upon why one is scared and corrective action, right? Like, I think there's this one like meme, right, of like the AI paperclip maximizer, and like it will like sort of consume all of planet and then the universe to just put it on goal, which is like totally dumb goal. Or then this brings up the question of, can we align these AI systems to be aligned with humans? And then I think that already, if you the further you keep digging down on this, like firstly, you can always find someone to make like an argument which you can't refute in some way. This could somehow happen. And then you can also find a lot of people use these arguments to push like very specific like policy agendas around regulation. And like, I think what interesting is that like what we ultimately like have when there's like sort of AI system complementing what humans do, is like, it's probably like a bad thing. There's no plurality, right? Like we know from like human societies, like in a social context, you want like differences, you want heterogeneity, otherwise like everything collapses. And like in the AI sense, my guess would be the exact same. Like you don't like, you can already see this obviously if you have models talk to models, like there's plurality, you get much more interesting sort of immersion than if you have like the same models talk to the same models. Like the more like entropy there is, the better. And basically what does this tell us is I think we should strive to create like we should think about like the problems with AI, like societal problems of AIs. And this basically means like thinking about, okay, not just about like a single AI, which is like controlled by a single centralized organization and sort of build all the regulation and all the thinking around it, but really work towards a state of the world where we have many competing AI systems that complement humans, that in loads of areas replace humans. And because I think that's generally the safest way to do it, like in the absence of clear safety. But why might it be the safest? Because firstly, you can't align any system to like some set of goals, because that by itself is like, like there's so many impossibilities towards this goal. Like, what even is the goal? Like, humans can't agree on like a set of goals. Like, you can't even define it, and then like, how do you instruct the thing, follow it, and so on and so forth. Like, it's just like a never-ending problem. But what we've been quite successful in, like some societies over time, is like creating institutions which like create checks and balances. And I don't see like fundamentally why we shouldn't be able to do that with AI, but it doesn't necessarily have to be institutions where it's a humans watching some AI. I think it's like creating AI systems which compete for each other, and like really thinking about like the systems level. And if you want to really like then go back to your question and like think about like, am I optimistic about the next 5 years? I'm also optimistic because I do think that one thing which crypto does is create these incentives for lots of different competing things to happen in a way which a centralized approach can't. And so the more like, I guess like of this crypto AI intersection we have, there'll be like a lot of people, who want to make a quick buck and like, sell you some vaporware, but there's also going to be a lot of like really fundamentally like defining projects, I think, that will generate new ways of like, maybe training models in a more decentralized way, maybe like bringing the right levels of inference, be like local models or like even like, proven centralized models. But then all the way up to the use cases where it's like multi-agent systems, like Sarah said earlier, and coming back to my institutions and like societies of agents point. And I'm like definitely in the camp of let's like make this as open as possible and compete, rather than this idea that we like constrict it to some ivory towers, because we know that the ivory tower won't function, right? Like every incident of history has shown us that if everything is like super centralized, it doesn't ultimately work out in terms of like controlling and aligning this with some high level objectives. So that's my take. Like very short term, I'm also very optimistic because I think there's just a lot of low hanging fruit in crypto. I mean, if you just think about like the UX of crypto, like independent of like AI thinking first, it's like, it's a terrible idea. Like you like require the human to have like knowledge of so many subsystems. Like they need to kind of understand what a blockchain is. They need to understand what a wallet is. They need to understand how these things hang together. Like not perfectly, but there's a lot of things. And then we only start like actually talking product, right? Like then you have like some product which does something, and now need to understand what wallet is like sort of there. You need to like care about that. And then like we're talking about the different products and like interacting with the different assets, be it in DeFi and so on. I think there's this massive opportunity to just put a lot of these things back in a box. But rather than that box being like provided by a like local SaaS provider and you taking out a subscription, it can be an agent which you operate, which like basically you own. And I think that opportunity hasn't like been nearly exploited as it could be. Like I'm thinking every like DeFi app should be thinking about, okay, how can we like not build a slightly slicker UI around bridging, but how can we like basically abstract like entire like segments of the industry behind an agent and let the agent figure out all the complexity. And then you can take that idea and take it to like any other, like be it social or like other domain.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Just I follow a little bit more closely like the benchmarks for generative SQL. So like removing the obligation to write SQL in applications is quickly becoming a thing. And I was imagining a few weeks ago, the idea that like when AI kit arrives in the developer toolkit for iOS apps, like why wouldn't a developer just write the text for the SQL they want and then cache the actual queries and let it automatically adapt to schema changes and all that? Exact same thing for crypto. Like why have a wallet and when you can just have a chat interface that people are all very familiar using? Makes a lot of sense. I was also thinking like, yeah, just to the optimism piece, I'm with Sarah, like I'm just so, it's like hard to imagine us not going at the and trying to harness the new capability and this new resource for humanity. And I think that we've been through tests of this before. I feel like when we're presented with a brand new technology that doesn't work in our kind of like evolutionary capabilities. So I think a lot like Cormac McCarthy has a really excellent essay from maybe a decade ago now on the origin of language and how language we didn't evolve at the speed at which language became incredibly valuable for us. And so what you saw is you saw the brain plasticity change. So like when you process language in your brain, it fires in many different parts of your brain. There's no specialization like your old lizard part of your brain. And that's because language entered and became so valuable that we just adapted over, say, 100,000 years to use it very effectively. And we won't have the time to do that. So like, but we've gotten better as technology has come along in humanity at adapting much more quickly. So like social networks, I'd say we're not finished adapting to, but like Dunbar's number was around for a long time. 150 people is like the maximum social connections you can maintain. Yet social networks have totally blasted that out. And we're finding ways that you can interact with these networks for like positive sum and without being, unhealthy, even though we haven't fully figured that out as society. And I think AI, we're going to go through these same periods where there's going to be all sorts of unhealthy things happening, but we're going to figure it out. Like, I mean, this is a really dumb analogy, but it's real. Like the other day I was driving down the road at like 80 miles an hour within 2 feet of another car. And I was like, how did we get to this world where I trust the technology and all the sort of safety mechanisms have been embedded in it that I can do that? And then at the same time, the people that want to drive at 200 miles an hour, they actually have a venue that they can go and compete and do that, but it doesn't detract from like the safety on the road where I'm driving at 80 miles or whatever that is, 120, 130 kilometers an hour. And I think that AI, I kind of trust society's ability to start building in those directions. And like, just like, it's going to take a lot of people to build it. And so there's no like individual evildoer that's going to necessarily be able to corrupt these things. There's going to be a lot of people contributing to it. And so far we've been pretty good, even though we've come close with some technologies, we've been pretty good at steering most technologies towards good and not killing ourselves. So I'm very optimistic.
I feel like for me, I'm not anti-AI. I think it's really interesting and I definitely use it for a ton of things. So if I said I was against, I would be a huge hypocrite. But I think there's like a level of skepticism just because of what we've seen happen with like social networks on their face. Like they should be a source for good. Like I think in the earlier days when we had that technology, like we were generally using it in a really good way. Like I remember using it to make a lot of friends in high school when like Facebook became a thing. And like, yeah, I mean, it was really different, I think, in the earlier days. And then now that it's become, I mean, it was always centralized, but now that it's so embedded in like corporate, like capitalism and stuff, they've gone kind of rogue with it. And and I think that's a big source of like why there's so much skepticism about AI, because we've seen how much these people who I would consider bad actors, who are just in it for profits, are manipulating these like good technologies to further an agenda that's not necessarily the benefit of like the general public or the consumer that's using it. So maybe like, is that something that you think because of the decentralized nature of AI and then the added benefits of crypto, like, is that something that we're moving away from?
I mean, I think they're great points because if we were to take like what is currently like the majority use of AI, right? That's basically most of deployment where you as a user have basically no or very little like insights into what you're actually even using. Like you might be using ChatGPT, they might be telling you like that model behind, but you have no way of knowing. You don't know what data went into it. A lot of data, you might have actually created, you get no benefit of that either. Actually, what, Ilya from Europe brings up a lot recently, I think a very important, it's like, it's obvious that people are going to incorporate advertisement into your like prompt calls, right? Like you can imagine a world where like, how do you make money once you're like at scale with something like OpenAI? Well, you're gonna like basically introduce an auction where when you send the prompt, the model will see if there's a profitable taker somewhere, and they'll slightly adjust the response to throw in like some knowledge about something it would not have otherwise given, right? So like your Google search, right? Like, you have your sponsored pieces, you'll have that with LLMs, like the, profit motive obviously drives towards that. And then like, that's the sort of capitalist or pure play capitalist stuff. And then you have this thing where, okay, like, let's say we actually have like some form of general intelligence or super intelligence one day, even where that is like highly centralized. Like, you can already see with the benign models we have today that like you get these somewhat unwieldy like limitations when using the model, right? Like someone might just not allow you to generate something because it's for safety. Like safety here is extremely poorly defined. I mean, I even spoke to some of the engineers who actually implement that and propaganda at OpenAI, and it's just like quite hand wavy. Like, they're trying their best, but like ultimately it's a bunch of like rules. And so I think like the way like we should be worried about things in a way, I think like decentralization approaches can help is by including or not including crypto in like giving more control to the user over like the entirety of the value chain, right? And like, I mean, where will we end up? I don't know, but in terms of like one thing which we can see in crypto is like this kind of composability and actually the like being real. Like it's not just a meme that like protocols compose, like DeFi protocols definitely compose into like higher level primitives. And then you also have that it's actually very competitive, right? Because it's like quite an open market space where anyone permissionlessly can create like a fork, try to attract some TVL, whatever, open the primitive on top. I do think that like generally on a kind of economic principles basis, the more of these open systems we have that are sort of deeply embedded in like a by design competitive environment, it's a good thing. Because what the good thing about capitalism is like the competitive part. The bad thing is like when it's a monopoly which is unconstrained, right? Like when you have your monopolies, which are basically just like rent seeking and extracting all the benefits of you, that's the problem. If you have like a good marketplace where different providers compete, that's the nice side. And that's exactly what I think, or hope, at least in principle, like by building on the script AI stack, we can push forward.
Definitely. Yeah, technology defines there will be a monopoly or not. It's defined by its nature. Let's check again social media. So like let's start with FM and AM radio. So like with FM we had choice, so it's more decentralized than the TV, than the multiple channels. So it's more decentralized, all the publications, all the publishing. So it's getting more decentralized. So like social media, it was a decentralized phenomenon at the beginning. But now internet got bigger and they just decided to preserve all the power by themselves. Then the problems are started. So because like traditional social media is the recommendations, the ranking system, you have a limited space and you have to prioritize something. So that's not a technological problem. That's a ontological problem. You have to prioritize. Whatever you do, it's wrong. That means. So I think we are coming to an end of this paradigm. So now, yes, we have user-centric internet thanks to this user-centric discovery paradigm. So it cannot be centralized again because users are in control now with this new technology. I can compose. I choose what I'm going to discover. Of course, there will be other risks. There will be some limitations in other ways, but the velocity of this new direction change in the user centricity part, I think it will change everything in terms of information discovery.
I don't have much to add there, but I think what you said is really interesting there. I was wondering, like, if it kind of feels like social network themselves were at first networks and then they were like follower platform where everything is. And I was trying to think if that was some sort of weird application of like Conway's law, where like the graph database itself isn't well suited to build these social networks. And so they start to imagine individual nodes in your network being in a graph database, and you then try to like bring monetization and like more clicks and things onto that graph, all of them start moving towards the same shape. But I don't know if that's right, but it's something I've been kind of wondering about the graph database, not the graph technology, like the use of a graph in social networks. But then I do think whatever the answer to that is, that AI actually should like profoundly change how social networks work, even at the Facebook scale. So I think we're likely going to see a shift again. And it might actually be quite good. Like when I think of the good applications of social network, it is that discovery. And what you were just saying about the ranking always being wrong, I think that might also be tied to the graph database and a challenge there about how you sort of process all that information and find the closest thing that I need to be seeing next or discovering next. But I think LLMs might abstract that away in a really, a really powerful way to find me the things that actually I do find valuable and I do want to learn more about, or I do want to follow. So it will be really interesting to track that over the next couple of years.
Definitely, that's what we do actually every day.
Yeah.
About the problem. Two parts that's solving one part is agents. So like you can find any information in the graph in multiple paths, right? You can do that way. Maybe like you will come up with an answer. Maybe you can go another way. So it's again a perspective issue. So agents are perspective machines. Multiple agents will build better relevancy. They will be competing for relevancy. They will be sometimes cooperating for relevancy. That's one part. And I think that solves the data integration biases, because most of the biases comes from engineering choices. And multiple agents will solve that, and we have most optimized route according to our needs. So and the second part is, again, is user centricity. If you don't like your answer, instead of this ranking algorithms, now you have a chance to navigate it. You can say, I don't like it. Don't show me this one, show me that one. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and I think it allows us to, like now finally we have a communication channel with AI, and that solves the most problems.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I don't want to keep you for too long because we're already over time, but I really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to join me, to provide such like interesting feedback and output about AI and crypto. I think it's a topic that's everybody's pretty interested in right now, myself included. So I hope that your optimism is correct. Like I hope that the future looks good for this. And I think it does. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good.